Yes,
We are
ma'am.
hearing you loud and
Yes.
clear.
I can hear you and I can also see you.
I've had enough technical difficulties today.
I know. I can't wait till we get back in the chamber, people. We got to work on that. Whew, my
So
goodness.
I try to be official and use my county laptop, but it doesn't cooperate. So I had to switch
Yeah.
to another device.
Okay. Well, you're in loud and clear now.
Awesome.
Let me step down and get my agenda. I'll be right back.
Yes, ma'am. I'm doing the same. Are we ready to begin?
I believe so.
Awesome.
So Councilwoman
Good evening,
Days.
everyone. Good evening, everyone. This is Councilwoman Shalonda Webb. I'm here with Councilwoman Rita Days, and we are hosting a joint session with our County Assessor, Mr. Jake Zimmerman. Today, we will be having a conversation on the impacts of the new assessments for the reassessments for 2021. We have special guests today with us that I would like to acknowledge. We have State Representative Neil Smith and Representative Trish Gunby. Are there any other special guests in the house?
I'll speak up to say that I see in the attendees list, since they can't speak for themselves, I see Representative Sarah Unsicker present as well. And I also see Mayor Ella Jones of the great city of Ferguson.
Awesome. Thank you all, special guests, for joining us today. At this time, I will turn it over to my colleague, Mrs. Councilwoman Rita Days, to welcome you as well.
But thank you very much. All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I can't really see myself, but thank you all so much for joining us. This is a very important session. It's important that we let everyone know the processes and procedures as to how we get to where we are. Councilwoman Webb and I believe in 1,000% in transparency and letting you know the kinds of things that go into these kinds of assessments. And we want to give you an opportunity to ask as many questions as you possibly can. If you can put them in the chat, that will be fine. But if you can't do that, you have our phone numbers and you can call us, and then and we can get to the answers that you need and get back with us. So I do appreciate the state elected officials joining us, as well as the local officials joining us. And we hope that this session will be very informational for you, and that you will glean what you need to for this and be able to impart this information to your constituents as well. So with that, I don't know if my staff is on, Councilwoman Webb. I'm not sure if your staff is on. I do have Maria Chappelle Nadal is my assistant, and you have Shantae Harmon Young is your assistant, and then perhaps the assessor, Mr. Zimmerman, will introduce his staff as well.
I would be I'd be delighted to do that, and then I'll turn it over to Sarah Siegel, my external affairs manager, who is going to be doing the rules of the road, and will play the job of traffic cop here to try and make sure we get everyone's questions answered. But before I toss it over to her, I would like to acknowledge 2 senior appraisers on my staff who have generously given their time to assist with several of these town hall meetings, and I want to express to everyone how much I appreciate them taking time out of their evening to help answer taxpayer questions and help us when we get into the real meat and bones here. The first person I'll introduce to you is Burchelle McGee, who is a longtime appraisal supervisor and formerly a line appraiser in our office, and Winnell Landers, who is an appraisal manager who also worked her way up through the ranks in our office, and who also has a separate former background in real estate, having listed many properties for sale herself. So I expect that you'll hear more from them as we move along this evening. And now let me toss it over to Sarah real quick.
Good evening, and thanks, Jake. As Jake mentioned, my job is to first let everyone know the rules of the road. As has been mentioned, we really want this to be an opportunity for folks to be able to ask their questions and get the information that you need about the reassessment process. For general purposes, let you know that if you have a general question, we will do our very best to answer it this evening. We do have a hard stop at 7:30, but I want to assure everyone that if we don't get to your question this evening, we will definitely get an answer back to you. The way we can do that is either by phone or if by the chat box. If for those of you who are here on the phone, who are listening in, and I see that there are a lot of people doing that, if you want to submit a question to us by phone, the number is 314-615-4981. And I will repeat that number a couple times during the course of this town hall meeting. So if you missed it that time, you can be listening for it again. If you want to write in a question, if you're online and you want to write in a question, we ask that you use the chat box and not the Q&A box. I'm not technical enough to know the difference. I just know that it's easier for us to pick up questions if you use the chat box. When you use the chat box, please be sure that you have given us your email address when you registered and signed into the meeting, so that, again, if we run out of time or it's a specific question about your property that we need to research, we can be sure to get back to you after the meeting. The other thing that I want to just remind everybody of is that if you want to ask a question in the chat box, everyone on the meeting will be able to see it. So if that's not comfortable for you, you're welcome to email us with a question. And the email address is assessor, ASSESSOR, at STLOUISCO.com. And again, I will repeat that a couple times during the meeting too. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Jake and ask him to take it from here.
With pleasure. And the one thing I think maybe we should just clarify, that phone number that you provided, that is a normal business hours phone number for the assessor's office. So don't go frantically calling that number tonight thinking that Sarah will be able to answer it on the fly. If you want to ask a question on the fly, that chat box is the best way to do it. But particularly if you have a question about the specific details of your property that may not be of interest to others on the call, or may also, for privacy reasons, you want to handle on your own, then please feel free to just call that number or send us an email tomorrow. I don't want to spend too much time on a long presentation here because I want to get to as many of your questions as possible. But for the benefit of those who may be experiencing this for the first time, or may have questions about what it is that we do and why everybody's paying attention once every 2 years, what I'd like to do is just give a little bit of background of who we are, what we're doing. And I want to do this in the vein of help us to help you, right? I see all the time folks who show up to a meeting with an appraiser or even a hearing before the Board of Equalization, and it turns out they didn't show up with information that would allow us to be helpful on the value of their property. And many times it's just because it can be difficult for the public to understand what we're doing. So when I do a little bit of the back to basics here, that's my mindset. My mindset is to give you the tools you need to engage productively with our office if it appears to you that we have messed something up. So what do? We are the assessor's office, and what that means is we are in charge of figuring out what your stuff is worth. And by your stuff, I mean the dirt, I mean the stuff that is built on top of the dirt, and I mean the stuff that drives around on the dirt. Under Missouri law, every 2 years, it is our job to value every single piece of property in St. Louis County. And by value it, that means figure out what it could have sold for on January 1st of this year. We're supposed to freeze time, take a magic snapshot, have a perfect crystal ball, and know exactly what your house would have sold for and exactly what your car would have sold for and exactly what the land underneath your house would have sold for on January 1st. Now, you'll notice when I just told you what it is that we do, I didn't say that one word, taxes. And this is the most important thing to get. Like if you take nothing else away from an hour with us this evening, take away this. We don't set the tax rates. Our job is to figure out what you could sell your property for. The school district, the fire department, and a bunch of other folks, but mostly the schools and the fire, along with, you know, the zoo and the museums and the special school district and so on. All of those folks decide what the tax rate is on all the properties within your neighborhood or within the community. And those taxes may rise or fall based on the bond issues from the school district this year or what you voted for the fire district in this last election or any number of other things. Our job and our only job is to figure out what your house could sell for and to figure out what your car is worth. And it's really, really important to understand that, because one of the most frustrating things for us and one of the hardest things to see is when someone comes in to talk with one of our appraisers and says, you know, you're breaking my heart. I'm scared to death of being taxed out of my home. I'm a senior citizen on a fixed income. And any of you who has ever seen me talk in public about senior citizens on fixed incomes knows how strongly I feel on this very subject, right? But when you come to talk with one of my appraisers, their job is to figure out what your house could sell for. And so they can, at least in pre-COVID times, they can give you a hug and they can tell you how concerned they are for you. But for them to help, you have to be able to show them why you think that the value that the county has on your property is incorrect. So what we do when we reassess property every 2 years, we are tasked with trying to figure out what it would have sold for on that magic January 1st date. But of course, as we all know, most people don't sell their houses exactly on January 1st. The odds are very, very small that we are going to know exactly what your house would have sold for on that day, right? So what do? Well, the first thing we do is we have to make sure that we actually know what's up with your house. We have to make sure that we've actually sketched it out right. And if you look on our website, you will see that we have a drawing of your house, a little sort of blocks and lines drawing showing how many floors it is and where the garage is and everything else. The first thing we got to do is get that right. And to get that right, we visit thousands upon thousands of properties every year. You may have seen appraisers out there in the community. We are socially distant right now. We're not at your doorbell in the same way that we once were, because we need to keep 6 feet away from people at all times. But we are still physically out there in the community looking at those properties. Once we figure out what the stuff looks like, then the next job is to figure out what properties have actually been selling in the neighborhood. Now, there are multiple approaches to figuring out value for big businesses and commercial structure. There are other ways of estimating the value, which I can get into if folks have questions and want to go into the weeds later. But for the vast majority of ordinary people, for the vast majority of residential properties, what we are doing is we are trying to find other homes in the neighborhood that have sold recently. Because if a house down the street from yours that looks pretty similar to yours happens to have sold on the open market in, February, then we have a pretty good guess of what a house like that, like yours, would have sold for in that same neighborhood on January 1st. And that's not an easy thing to do because comparable sales are never perfect, and the house down the street never looks exactly the same as yours. And in fact, often it's a little nicer because it's been niced up to put it on the market for sale. And it didn't sell on exactly January 1st. So there's all sorts of adjusting and estimating that we have to do to try to get it right. And I and my appraisal staff can talk about that more later if folks are interested. But that's the gist of it. We're trying to figure out what your house looks like. We're trying to figure out the overall condition of your house and the neighborhood that you live in. And we are trying to figure out what other properties in your neighborhood have been selling for. So what do the numbers show us? This year, I was scared to death. I came into this office in 2011, and many of you will remember that that was at the tail end of the foreclosure crisis. That was at the tail end of the worst economic situation of my lifetime, and a terrible time for real estate, particularly in North St. Louis County, where I believe most of our attendees will be hailing from this evening. When I first came into this office, and I did it on an explicit promise that we were going to follow the facts wherever they lie, that if the value of your property goes down, your assessment needs to go down. And, in the Riverview Garden School District, to pick an extreme example, we saw home values going down 20, 30, 40% compared to what they had been 2 years ago. Now, that's devastating for the community, and that's the effect of foreclosures. It's the effect of neighborhoods being torn apart. It's the effect of short sales. It's the effect of out-of-state slimeball landlords converting owner-occupied homes into properties of lower desirability, a whole bunch of bad stuff. But it was also the truth. And I can tell you that there were some unhappy folks from the school district, and there were some unhappy folks from the fire department, right? But the facts was the facts and the numbers was the numbers. And I made a commitment to do that for the people that we serve. And in the years since then, we've seen good years, we've seen bad years. We've seen parts of St. Louis County do very well and other parts of county not so well. And then we saw 2 years ago when the real estate market was booming and homes were selling for more really across the board. I will tell you frankly that I was scared to death a year ago at this time, as we just began to learn about how scary this terrible pandemic really was, that we were about to enter a devastating recession, that we were going to see a foreclosure crisis all over again, that people would be losing their homes, and that values would go through the tank. This pandemic has been worse than our worst predictions in any number of ways. But in at least that respect, I'm really, really happy to say that I was wrong. It turns out that this has actually been, whatever else it's been, and it's been a hard and a terrible and a scary time, but it's been a pretty good time to own a home in St. Louis County. Across the board, in affluent parts of the county, in less affluent parts, in rich neighborhoods, in working class neighborhoods, and everywhere in between, what we are seeing is that homes are selling for more money, sometimes significantly more money than they did 2 years ago. And the really interesting thing is that the best kind of real estate to own right now, in terms of, your biggest investment, the home that you live in, is affordably priced housing. I don't know how much of the reason for that is 20-somethings who were living in mom and dad's basement, desperate to get out, desperate to buy that first house. I don't know how much of it is low interest rates and banks finally lending again after the foreclosure crisis. I don't know how much of it is the pandemic and a whole lot of people who used to live in apartments just hungry for a little backyard and a little piece of grass to run around with the dog and the kids. What I do know is that homes that are worth less than $300,000, your typical middle-class homes, your $100-something-thousand house, those homes have been doing better. They're selling for better on the open market than anything else in St. Louis County. Ask any real estate agent and they will tell you that it's a really, really good time to sell an affordably priced home. They're flying off the market. People are having bidding wars. They sell the first day they're listed. If you happen to own $1 million home in Clayton or Ladue, look, don't cry any sad tears for the good people of Ladue. Okay, their home values are not going in the tank, but those homes are not flying off the market, and they're not increasing in value in the same way as more affordably priced homes are. And so I'm going to ask Rob, our technical host, if he can put up the map here. He's anticipated me, and it already is. And I don't know if you can zoom in on it to make it a little easier for folks to see. And I'll just describe it for folks who are listening on the phone and won't be able to see it in any case. But the map tells you the story. If you look at some of the more affordably priced neighborhoods in St. Louis County, north and south, you will see that that is where home values and home sales have been doing the best compared with 2 years ago. This is a great time to own a home in the Ferguson-Florissant School District. The typical home in the Ferguson-Florissant School District is worth roughly 15% more than it was 2 years ago. This is equally a spectacular time to own a house in Limay. And you'll note that the good folks of Limay, the population there, I mean, it's South County and it's very different demographically from North County, but it's also not. It's a lot of senior citizens living on fixed incomes. It's a lot of folks in smaller ranch houses. And when they sell that home, it is very likely that the person buying the home is a much younger couple. It may be somebody looking to expand on it, to flip it, or to do some construction, or heaven knows what. And so it's very interesting that this is a good time from the perspective of a homeowner to live in Limay, and it's a good time from the perspective of a homeowner to live in my old stomping grounds in the Rittner School District, for example. And by contrast, you will notice that those homes in places like Clayton, you'll see still going up in value compared with 2 years ago, but it's not the same as in the more affordably priced parts of St. Louis County. So on the one hand, this is great news, right? If you're planning to sell your house tomorrow, I just gave you the best news all year, right? You're going to make a lot of money when you sell your house. Your real estate agent is going to be very, very happy because you're giving them an easy job to do. It's not such good news if you're that first-time home buyer. If you're trying to get out of your apartment and you're trying to buy that first house and you scrimp together $10,000 for a down payment, but that's all you got, it's going to be a harder time to buy that starter house than it would have been a couple of years ago. That is one of the big downsides of this hot real estate market, and it's something that concerns me a little for the community. But this is where we get to us doing our job. When the market is hot, and especially when the market is hot in places where real people live, where middle-class people live and working folks live, it is really, really important to check our work and make sure we are doing the job right. Because if we mess up, if I give your house an extra bedroom that it doesn't really have, or an extra bathroom that it doesn't really have, or if I think that your house has a beautiful shiny new kitchen like the one that's sold down the street, when actually your kitchen hasn't been updated since 1963, then I'm going to have the wrong information about the status and condition of your house. And if I have the wrong information, then that means I'm not going to value your house right. And if I value your house wrong, then at the end of the day, you could be staring at an unfair tax bill. And when that tax bill comes in December, it's too late. It's too late to complain. It's too late to do anything about it. You wind up just paying that bill, right? So that's why we are doing this right now. Back to what I said at the very beginning, right? The whole purpose of this tonight is help us to help you. So the reason I went through all that stuff about real estate and what it's worth and how we value it is so that you can understand the one thing that I'm asking everybody on this call, on this WebEx meeting to do, which is to go to the county website, or if you can't find your way to the county website, to give us a call so we can help you, and just take a quick look at what we think your property looks like. It'll take you 5 minutes. Do it right now while the values are preliminary. Preliminary means there's still time to fix mistakes, still time to change stuff without going through a formal process. Take a look at that sketch that I told you about earlier. Make sure it actually looks like your house. Take a look at what we think about the condition of your home. Take a look at what we think about the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, the last time it was renovated. All that is right there on our property information page about your house. And if something looks wrong, let us know. Because look, In the best of circumstances, in normal times, it's not like you want a county bureaucrat inside your house, right? The odds are very good that you know more about what your house looks like inside than we do. And these are not normal times. These are not the kind of times when, even if, you know, for fun, your idea of fun is having a county employee in your living room. Well, number one, if that's true, then you're not a very normal person. But number two, in these times, no matter how much fun you think that is, we still can't come into your living room. And hopefully this terrible pandemic will be behind us soon enough. But for now, we're going to keep everybody safe. You don't want us doing interior inspections. We're not doing it. So this is why it is really, really important. You got to let us know. If we think the house is shiny and new, in conditions similar to the one that sold last year that got spiffed up, you know, 9 ways till Sunday. And in reality, the roof is leaking, and you have an estimate for the contractor that it'll cost $20,000 to fix it, and the kitchen hasn't been updated since the lime green table fixtures from 1958. You got to take a picture of it. You got to send it to us so we can take a look at it. So let's talk about that process real quick, and then I will stop going on and on here and instead try to answer specific questions. In a normal year, the way it would work is these preliminary values, what we think it's probably worth, would go up on the website for folks to take a look at it. People can take a look at it right now. Call us if there's a question. If they wanted to, they could schedule an informal conference to come in and meet with an appraiser. We would do a few thousand of those. And then you would get to appeals season, where if you still don't agree with us and we can't work it out, then you can schedule an appeal, come in, meet with an appraiser for 15 minutes. If you don't reach an agreement, go talk to a hearing officer. The hearing officer looks at the pictures or the evidence you brought in, makes a decision or a recommendation, and it's your opportunity to talk to somebody who doesn't work for me so you can know that there was a fair third party. All that is well and good in a normal year. This is not a normal year. We cannot conduct thousands of informal conferences in person, and those appeal hearings, when they happen, they're going to be in a format like this. They're going to be on WebEx or something like it, or they're going to be over the phone. It's not going to be the same as in years past. So we took a long, hard look, and we decided, look, let's make some lemonade out of these lemons, and let's see if we can't find a way to be a little bit more efficient here, help more people, and take out some of the stress, and take out, you know, if we can avoid the meeting with a government employee, generally speaking, I find that that makes most people a lot happier. So what we are doing, we've started doing it right now, and that's why I'm really encouraging everybody to take a look now, is when folks think that we've got it wrong, if we've got the condition of your property wrong, if we've got the characteristics of your property wrong, or if we've compared you to the wrong sales, then this is a great time to just send us the stuff that you otherwise might have brought to that hearing at the Board of Equalization. Just send it to us in an email. And as time permits, we'll just have the appraisers take a look at it. And then look, if it's complicated or it's something where reasonable minds can differ and it's hard to know who's saying what, then fine. We can always still do an appeal like we would have in the good old days. Maybe we'll just do it by phone instead of in person. But my experience is that most of the reason that we get it wrong, most of the reason that folks need to come in and talk with us is because of something that's just an obvious mistake, because we just didn't know about the condition of the property, because we thought that construction had happened when it hadn't. There's a whole variety of things like that, where sending us a couple of pictures or sending us the correct comparable sales that maybe your friend, the real estate agent, put together for you may be good enough to solve the issue in 5 minutes and save everybody a whole lot of stress. And so to that end, look, everybody who's listening here tonight, all 50 some odd people here, and I imagine other folks who will be watching this recorded on the Councilwomen's websites later, by definition, you are sophisticated people. You showed up for a town hall meeting on Cisco WebEx on a workday evening when you could be with your families right now. So that tells me that you are folks who already pay attention to this process, and that many of you will be able to find your way to our website and look up your home value without help from us, which means I need you to be my ambassador. I need you to go talk to the senior citizen on a fixed income who is scared to death about being taxed out of her house and doesn't know where to turn. I need you to go talk to the single parent who is working 2.5 jobs and trying to pick the kids up from school and doesn't have time to deal with this and doesn't understand. And by the time that tax bill comes in December, it's going to be too late. It only takes 5 minutes to take a quick look at the house and make sure that we are actually valuing it fairly, and most importantly, that we're describing it right, that we got the square footage right, that we've got the size right, the neighborhood, and all the rest of it. So one other thing that I want to talk about, and that is that question of comparable sales, because when we are valuing your home, assuming that we got it right, okay, assuming that we know the right number of bedrooms and bathrooms and we know the condition, and you really do look like the other properties in the neighborhood. The core thing that we got to do right is we got to find the homes that actually sold close to January 1st of this year that look kind of sort of like yours, so it's a decent point of comparison. And one of the things that can be very frustrating for taxpayers is they show up to talk with an appraiser in my office and they say, look, you valued my neighbor's house at $52,000 and the neighbor down the street at $54,000 and the one down from that is $58,000, but you got me at $65,000 and that's not fair. So the appraiser can agree with you. They can say, yeah, that doesn't seem fair, but they can't help you because you didn't give them comparable sales. You didn't give them anything that lets them figure out the value of your home. All you did is show them that we might be wrong in the neighborhood. And the appraiser has no way of knowing if we're too low on your neighbor and too high on you, or the other way around. So what is a comp? A comp is a home that actually sold on the open market. The open market means an arm's length transaction, which means that Uncle Bert didn't sell the house to cousin Sally for $50 because it was really her graduation gift and Uncle Bert was feeling real generous this year. And it also means that it wasn't a short sale, it wasn't a bank sale, it wasn't a foreclosure on the courthouse steps. It means two people, one person sold the house to another person, neither of them were best buddies with each other, and both of them had their own realtor or their own lawyer, so we know that they actually listed the house and got a fair price for it. That's a comp. Now, you're never going to find a comp that looks precisely like your house, and that's okay. It can only look kind of sort of like your house. It can be 300 square feet bigger. We know that that means if the comp sold for $150,000, but it's bigger than your house, we can adjust. We know what houses sell for by square foot in a given school district. So it's more important if, say, you live in the Hazelwood School District. It's more important that the home sold in that same school district and looks kind of sort of like yours than if the home is a carbon copy of yours, but it's in the Pattonville School District, because homes sell for different dollars per square foot in different neighborhoods. So the other way to help us help you is if you look at the house and you say, okay, look, Zimmerman's not wrong about the house. He sketched it right. This looks like my house, and they're right about the year it was built, and they're right about the rest of it. But this is crazy, right? He thinks I could sell it for 150 grand, and my realtor told me that I'd be lucky to get 120. If your realtor told you that, there is a reason. And the reason most likely is that we picked the wrong comps. The reason is that we found some houses that sold for $150,000, but the kids there actually go to a different elementary school, and we should have compared you to the houses 2 blocks down the street to the west rather than 2 blocks down the street to the east. That's the kind of stuff where you know your neighborhood better than the county does. And so it is very possible that if you find some actual sales of properties that look more like yours, you can help our appraisers to figure out what the property is actually worth. So that's what we do. And back to where I started, which is also back to help us to help you, right? What didn't I say a word about there? I didn't say a word about taxes. We don't control the taxes on your house. If you are unhappy about that phenomenon where it seems like the value of the property went down, but the taxes still went up anyway, and how can that be fair? You may want to have a conversation with your neighborhood school board member, and you may want to have a conversation with the folks at the fire district. Our job is not to make money for the school district, and it's not to make money for the fire department. Our job is also not to give a tax break to whoever comes and shows up at the door. In this world of assessments, everybody knows who is most likely to try and play the game. The people who are most likely to try and pull a fast one on our office, the people who are most likely to try and pretend that their house is a farm in order to get an unfair tax break, the people who are most likely to try and pretend that their business is actually a charity to get a tax exemption they don't deserve. You know, it's not you and me. It's not folks living in houses, working real jobs and going about our business, right? It's large, sophisticated corporate property owners, and it's the folks owning the million-dollar homes in the most affluent parts of the Central Corridor. We spend a lot of time fighting with those folks and sometimes their lawyers and their tax representatives in the Gucci suits. There are plenty of people like that who would like to game the system, because if they can get 5% or 10% whacked off the value of their property, even though it is undeserved, then they get a nice little freebie. But if they get a freebie, what happens? Who pays? And the answer is you pay, because if the Hazelwood School District loses $1 million in revenue because a bunch of commercial property owners persuaded us or persuaded the Board of Equalization to reduce the value of their property by tens of millions of dollars in a way that was undeserved. So fine, the corporate taxpayer saves $1 million and their CFO is very happy. Well, what does the Hazelwood School District do? They got two choices. They can either fire $1 million worth of teachers, they can do some layoffs, they can close the school, or they can raise taxes just a little bit on everybody else to make up the difference. And that is why you want an assessor's office on the job that is committed to only valuing the property fairly, and that's going to stand up to those guys and say no special deals. Because the moment you start handing out breaks, the moment you start handing out reductions to everyone who asks for one, the folks who will be first in line are going to be the lawyers in the Gucci suits and the corporate tax representatives and the big businesses and the large property owners they represent. So my commitment to you is twofold. Number one, you come to me with information about your real estate that shows us that we got it wrong, and we are here to work with you and we are here to fix it, because it is not our job to make a dollar for the school district or the fire department. But my second commitment to you is that I don't care how well connected the lobbyist, and I don't care how fancy the lawyer, and I also don't care how much they harass the staff. And believe me, they harass the staff because they want to make it hard to deal with them, and they want to make it easy to just settle and make it go away for a few percent. But as long as I'm on this job, we're not going to do that. And the reason we're not going to do that is because I got to have you trust me when I say that we're committed to being fair to everybody. And the moment you give away a freebie to one of those guys, that credibility is gone, and gone is any hope of fair assessments across St. Louis County. That's what we do. That's why we do it. That's how we are here to help you. And with that, I'm quite sure that we have plenty of questions, so let's get right to it.
Thanks, Jake. I'm going to start with the questions that were sent in earlier today. And just so everyone knows, in the interest of being fair, I'm just going to take them in the order that we got them, first come, first serve. The first question is, why does property tax increase for seniors? Most seniors are on a fixed income, and with increases, they will be forced out.
Sarah, I apologize. I had a brief sound issue there. Could you just recite the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Why does property tax increase for seniors? Most seniors are on fixed income, and with increases, they will be forced out.
So I'm really, really glad to get this question, because it is an injustice in Missouri law. And I'm going to take off my assessor hat for a minute to editorialize for a little bit, because I happen to see a couple of members of the state legislature on this call. And the ones who are on this call are not the ones who need to hear this, because they're already the ones who are on the side of the angels. But unfortunately, there are a number of members of the Missouri legislature who have been stubbornly unwilling to pursue a real fix to this problem. In a civilized society, senior citizens should not be taxed out of their homes. People on fixed incomes should not be taxed out of their homes. Full stop. And this state used to have something called the homestead credit that was explicitly designed to prevent that, along with a more generous version of something called the circuit breaker, which still exists, but not nearly as generous as it should be. The fact of the matter is that the state can and should solve this problem. Because, look, I can do my job perfectly. I can get the value of that home exactly right. And it will still be the case that if you are someone who bought the house 40 years ago, when the house was worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth less than it is now, look, it's great news someday if you're going to sell the house that the house is worth more. But if the taxes from the schools and the fire and everybody else keep going up and up and up, at the same time as what the value of the house actually is goes up and up and up, but you don't plan to sell the house, you can get stuck with a tax bill you can't afford. And that is wrong. And the reason it's so wrong is because it is so easily fixable. A combination of bringing back the homestead credit, strengthening the circuit breaker, and if you really want to get wonky with me, I can expound at length on how the state of Oregon solved this problem once and for all by simply letting those senior citizens defer tax payments until the day that they sell the home or, God forbid, pass away. All of this stuff can be done, and it doesn't even cost that much money. And the intransigence from some members of the legislature, and I'm not going to get into partisan politics here, but you can probably guess where some of those members of the legislature come from, is deeply frustrating to me. And I'll just emphasize again that every single member of the legislature who I see with us this evening is one of the good guys here. So if you happen to speak with any of them, number one, tell them thank you. And number two, let's put some pressure on the rest of the legislature to get this job done. Circling back to the job that you pay me to do, right? I can't go to the school district or the fire department for you and tell them that they shouldn't raise their tax rates. And I can't change the tax rate on your home. All that I can do is value it for what it could actually sell for, because that's the job that the state tells me to do. To do that fairly and to do that right means spending extra time making sure that we get it right for those senior citizens, because that senior citizen on a fixed income is precisely the sort of person who isn't hiring a corporate tax representative. The corporate tax representatives will always find their way to our office, and finding a way to say no to them when they bring something that's inappropriate to us is a lot of what we do. What that means is that the people we should be saying yes to, the people who actually need help, sometimes need a little help finding their way to us. And that's where the folks listening in tonight come in. If your neighbor, if somebody else in your building, if somebody down the street is that person, see if you can take 5 minutes to just walk them through it right now. Just make sure we don't have an unfair value on their property. And if we do, help them get in touch with us so we can fix it now while the values are still preliminary.
Thanks, Jake. Before we go on to the next question, I've been asked to make a little technical announcement. Ms. Harmon Young tells me that she's getting calls, and I imagine some other folks might also, saying that this event is requiring a password. Okay, that was not what was supposed to be happening. Our technical assistant tells me that they think that there's a problem with the computer system, but we want everyone to know, and to Jake's point, tell your friends and your neighbors that this event is being recorded, and it's going to be posted on the county website and on social media, and there will also be an email link for those folks who are having issues. So it's unfortunate that there's this problem, but I just wanted to stop and remind everyone to please spread the word and let folks know that they can access this recorded or with an email.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're obviously not going to be able to get to everybody's question in any case, and many questions will be about people's individual property. So I'll just ask again, Sarah, will you just repeat both the email address and the number folks can call right now? And if anybody knows anyone who's having trouble getting onto the meeting, we can pass that along to them.
Absolutely. And for those folks also on the phone, the number to call is 314-615-4981. Again, 314-615-4981. The email address is assessor, ASSESSOR, at STLOUISCO.com. Again, ASSESSOR@STLOUISCO.com. And if all else fails, you can just Google St. Louis County Assessor and you'll find us that way too.
All right,
Okay.
Sarah, what other questions do we have this evening?
Next question. Why are updates to your home included in property taxes? Improvements are already difficult and it's hard to make repairs for those living in, trying to live in a decent housing and keeping their homes up. Paying increased property taxes is extra, especially for those whose mortgages are underwater.
Mm-hmm. So it's an excellent question, right? Which is, it can feel a little weird, like you put all that money into putting on the new addition, and then you see your assessment next year and you say the assessment went way up. But remember that the job that we are given to do is to figure out what the house is actually worth, what the house would sell for, to do the same thing that a realtor would do. And so a real estate agent is gonna look and say, hey, this house would probably sell for a lot more money if you put in that second bathroom, because buyers in this neighborhood really are insisting on at least 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, right? So our job is to try and take that snapshot in time of what homes really are selling for in your neighborhood. And so that's precisely why it goes this way, because the alternative would be discriminating against people in lower value properties by giving an extra break. If we gave a break and said, hey, you know what? Do all the home additions you want. We won't change the value of your house, okay? Your house used to be worth $100,000. Now the truth is you updated the kitchen and you put in a new bathroom, and we know that the house would really sell for $150, but we'll pretend that it's still worth $100. If we were to do that, what we would be doing is we would be giving you a break and thereby discriminating against the person down the street who still lives in the $100,000 house, but is now going to pay a comparatively higher share of property taxes, even though they did not update their home. So that it's state law is the short answer, but the long answer is that it's a pretty fair law, because you don't want to create a world where the person in the ritzy house in Clayton who decides to put a bowling alley in the basement doesn't pay the fair market value of their house and everybody else pays the difference.
Okay, next question. I wish to know why our property assessments are increasing, but the value of our homes for selling purposes are decreasing.
So if that is true, then that means we're wrong about your neighborhood, right? If homes in your neighborhood are selling for less money than they were 2 years ago, then your assessment needs to be going down too. And that's a situation where it comes back right back to what we said before, which is it's probably happening because we've picked the wrong comparable sales. And so I'm going to hand this over actually to one of our sophisticated appraisers here this evening. And I'm going to ask Winnell Landers if she could just take a moment and talk about where you are most likely to see that kind of phenomenon and how somebody can be best equipped to sort of show us the right comparable sales, show us why their neighborhood might look a little bit different from what we think it looks like.
Well, there's a lot of neighborhoods, especially over in North County, Moline Acres. Some people fix their houses up and they sell on the market for a lot more, but the neighborhood is bad. So a lot of people, the values are going down because of the neighborhoods. But our job is to look at the valid sales in the neighborhood. The owners in that neighborhood are saying, but just look at the neighborhood. But people are still willing, buyers are willing to pay more for housing there. We have to look at the valid sales.
And
We do
Winnell, can I just interrupt real quick, because folks may not know what you mean when you say the word valid. So can you just explain a little bit what's the difference between a valid sale and one that we wouldn't consider for valuation purposes?
Well, you explained it earlier when you talked about foreclosures. Foreclosures are people that have lost their homes. They're now owned by the bank, and the bank just wants to get it out of their inventory because they don't want to take care of the maintenance of the property and pay the taxes and keep the grass cut. So they sell it for a lower price to get it out of their inventory. They recoup some of their money, but it's gone. A HUD house is something that someone bids on. It's not market value. It's whoever gives me the most money so I can get this out of my inventory. Investor sale. You sell your house to an investor because it has all kind of condition issues. So you sell it to the ugly house guys, and he buys it and he says, why should I pay taxes for, higher taxes on this? But
Yep.
we won't use that sale. That's not an arm's length transaction. I mean, it's a foreclosure. Those aren't valid sales. Valid sales are you list your house on the open market, not for 2 days, but it's on the open market for 30 days, 60 days, for everybody to see it and everyone to have an opportunity to come in and bid on a fair market price. The buyers make the market.
The ugly sales guy the ugly house guy is a great example. And I think that's really important for folks to understand, because folks do sometimes say some version of, yeah, you think my house is worth $60,000, but my neighbor sold his for 40, right? If my neighbor sold his for 40 to the ugly house guy, then the ugly house guy turns around and tries to get a break. And the ugly house guy tries to say, you got to lower the value to 40. And we fight him on that, because we are not interested in these out-of-state investors getting a tax break at the expense of hardworking people living in their house and selling it the ordinary way. But that's why it's so important to differentiate between those real open market sales and the ones that don't constitute the real housing market. Sarah, what's our next question?
Well, we have another question that's, I think, a really good question. Are drive-by assessments still occurring?
Not just no, hell no. I made a promise when I came into this office that for as long as I was your assessor, there would never, ever, 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 ever be a drive-by assessment. And the staff can assure you that is sometimes not a lot of fun in reassessment years. 2 years ago, our staff visited tens of thousands of properties over the space of a few months, and we are doing it again as we speak. And if you are living in one of those properties that we visit, you will see that the appraiser is not staying in the car, that the appraiser is getting up, they are walking up to your door, they are walking around the property. We are doing non-contact home inspections, unlike 2 years ago, when if I visited your home, I would have rung your doorbell and I would have asked you if you wanted me to take a look inside. Now, my experience is that 1 person out of 100 wants me to come inside when I ring their doorbell. And there are very, very good reasons why many people don't want us fine county employees barging around your kitchen, right? But for this year, uniquely, that 1 person out of 100 doesn't get to invite me in for a cup of coffee either, because we are sticking to inspecting the outside. And if there's information you need to share about the inside, we ask you to send us pictures or everything that we talked about before. But even though we have to sometimes break our backs doing it, and even though sometimes it's a lot of overtime and it's a lot of hours in the field, our job is our job. The state gives us very explicit instructions about when we need to physically visit homes, and we do it. We do it every day, and we're proud to do it.
Okay, next question. Explain the necessary steps for reassessment after disagreement.
That is an outstanding question. And since I've talked about the basics of it a little bit, and I've talked about the more informal process that we're using right now. And again, I'll just pitch that one more time, right? If you see something obviously wrong, please don't wait for a Board of Equalization hearing. Just give us a call, just send us an email. The values are preliminary right now. It's very easy to correct those obvious mistakes. But there is a process, and it is a process that the ultimate decider is not me, and it is not the folks who work for me, and that is very, very deliberate. It is so that you can be heard by a third party called the Board of Equalization. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to our other panelist that you haven't heard from yet. That's Burchelle McGee. And Burchelle has conducted easily thousands of those appeal hearings over the course of her career with St. Louis County. And in fact, she was one of the first people I ever sat in with when I was watching taxpayers do those hearings for the first time 10 years ago. So I'm going to invite Burchelle to just walk us through the process of how that actually looks for a taxpayer when they do it.
Well, we have different ways to do it now. So like you said, right now is the easiest way to go on the website and take a look at what we have down for your property. We want to look at the size, the shape, and the amenities that you have on your property. If you do notice something that's different, give us a call. We can discuss it with you over the phone and go over what we're showing on the property record as far as what we count as square footage and what we don't count in your square footage, and we can get those things together. That could solve the problem. But if you need a hearing where you need to sit down with us, then we'll go over everything. And in case you didn't know, there's about 375,000 residential properties, and there's not even 30 of us. So we use the computer to help us out a little bit. So, but sometimes that computer doesn't know where those boundary lines lie. It can cross over into different municipalities sometimes, and it may pull comparables that aren't quite comparable for you. And that's where you can say, hey, closer to the end of the year, closer to the date that you all are thinking about, there was some houses right around me that sold. Well, give us that information and we can use that, because we do have a cutoff time to come up with these preliminary values, and we have a cutoff date, and some of the sales that you might find could be excluded from that workup because we had to cut it off. And we can take those that you have researched and found and use those as alternative value methods to come up with a value for you that could be more pleasing in your opinion. But just because you don't like your value, you don't like that it went up, does not mean that it's incorrect. Most people don't think about that value because they're not trying to sell their homes. And it's probably gone up, and you can think my house can't possibly be worth it. But after having a decent conversation with somebody and going over all the details and the comparables, you sit back and say, maybe I can get that for my house. But most people don't know because they're not trying to sell their house. But if we can't come to the agreement in the immediate times, you will go on to a more formal process with the Board of Equalization, who are outside realtors and appraisers that can come up with a final say of value at that phase. But we like to try to get it solved before then. So you can go over your information thoroughly and see if what we're saying makes sense to you. Because on the website, you can see what we compared you to. You can see how far it is away from you. You can see everything. And just because a house looks like yours from the front does not mean it's the same. It could look the same, but her house could be bigger. I did talk to a lady and she said, well, mine is more than that one. And we went over, come to find out that her house was 10 feet deeper across 48 inches wide. So her house was almost 500 square feet bigger than the one she was complaining about, but they look the same from the front. So you have to know kind of what you're talking about before you start the process. So get familiar with your property and your neighborhood so you can go from there.
Thanks very much, Burchelle. Sarah, what's next?
Well, let's take some questions from the chat box. The first one is, if all the homes on my block are foreclosures, how can I sell my home for the right price?
So that is a super fair question, and it's one of the tougher things that we deal with, and we dealt with this a lot back in that 2011 reassessment cycle. We frequently found situations where it's all well and good to say, look, what we care about is those valid sales, those open market sales. But at some point, yeah, if everything on the block is really a bank sale, then like it or not, that can become the thing that determines the market. And in fact, back then I advocated for, and we got a change in the state law that would permit us to take those into account where it was appropriate to take it into account. And that was actually a moment of bipartisan agreement where I was able to work with a arch conservative Republican state senator at the time, who no longer serves in public office, but who was as far to the right as I am on the progressive side of the spectrum. But she and I had common cause on that subject, and that permitted our office to take those factors into account where it's appropriate. Fortunately, we no longer live in the time of the foreclosure crisis. And while there are still a handful of neighborhoods in St. Louis County where unfortunately we still have that phenomenon, this phenomenon of neighborhoods falling apart and owner-occupied homes all converting en masse to rental and being bought up by out-of-state landlords just trying to make a quick buck, that's a scary phenomenon. It's scary for reasons that are much, much bigger than the assessments in any one year, because one foreclosure is a tragedy for the family who lost their home, but 5 foreclosures is a tragedy for the neighborhood and for the community. And so I think the thing that I should say here is that to the extent that you live in a neighborhood where that kind of situation is really going on, where you have properties that there's so many bank sales and the bank isn't keeping up the house and there's litter building up on the front yard. Like Rochelle said before, the computer doesn't know about that, and the odds are very good that our appraisers don't know about it unless you come and you let us know. And that's one of those situations where folks want to let us know. And it also comes back to what I was saying before, which is that the best news about the real estate market right now is that more affordable properties are selling for more money than they used to. And what that means is that a lot of folks who used to be upside down on their mortgages aren't anymore. And so whatever it means in terms of your assessment, at the end of the day, that's pennies compared to the costs associated with the bank taking your house. And I breathe a huge sigh of relief that homes really are selling for more than they were 2 years ago, because I don't want to ever live through another foreclosure crisis like we did 10 years ago.
Thanks. Here's another question that came in a little bit earlier today. Excuse me. What are some different home value assessment practices used in other states or counties? Are there others used in other states or counties? Do they use the sale of the most updated and renovated homes in the area, or something else?
So I'm going to take a little bit of that question and then I'm going to punt it to one of our real estate experts here. But to the extent that the question is, what do they do in other places, and are there other ways of figuring out what stuff is worth? So what they do in other places, if they are good places, they do the same stuff that we do. There's a standard setting body. It's called the International Association of Assessment Officials, the IAAO. And I challenge you to say that 5 times fast. But the IAAO and the State Tax Commission here in Missouri set standards for the kinds of policies you're supposed to follow to make sure that you don't discriminate, to make sure that you value fairly and across the board. And we follow those IAAO standards, and we commit ourselves to trying to get those ratios at or very close to what properties are really selling for. And our test on this is that State Tax Commission, which does a study every couple of years. And you frequently find that there are many jurisdictions in Missouri that don't have their assessments close to the actual sales prices of homes. And many places in rural Missouri, it's not at all uncommon for the assessments to average out closer to 70 something or 80 something % of the real price. And so your first instinct is to look at that and say, whoa, that sounds like a great deal. I'd take 70 or 80 cents on the dollar. Zimmerman, you should be like those country assessors. But I shouldn't, because if we do that, 2 things happen. First thing that happens is if you cut the assessments by 20% across the board, then what would happen? Well, the first thing that would happen is the school district and the fire department would all immediately wind up raising their tax rates by 20% across the board. So your tax bill would stay the same. But not only would your tax bill stay the same, and not only would you not get any freebie from me, someone would be getting a freebie. And the person who's getting the freebie is the person who doesn't make any changes to their property, stays put in that one place, and that person over time gets a better and a better and a better deal because, you know, the old country assessor just kind of pretends that the property has never changed. which means that the person who bought the house next door, the person who just moves in, takes a bath, because the country assessor has everybody else's house valued at 70 cents on the dollar. But then when you move in, by God, you're going to pay 100 cents on the dollar. That's the kind of unfairness and discrimination that you get when you have assessors who don't do it right across the board. That's why those IAAO standards matter, and that's why I'm so proud that we are one of the very best jurisdictions in this state for doing it right. Now, are there other ways to value property? Yes, there are. Usually for most homes, the way you value property is to figure out what something else sold for, and that tells you what it sold for. But there are two other methods, and I'll just describe them real briefly. One is to figure out if property would be bought as an investment rather than a place to live, something like an office building or a restaurant. Then a typical method for valuing it, because restaurants don't sell all that often, is instead to figure out what the rent would be, and therefore what a typical landlord would want to get paid by their office tenants. If you figure out what the rent is and you figure out how risky the property is, then you can get a guess at what it would sell for. That's called the income approach. Then a third approach is called the cost approach. So let's say you don't live in a normal middle class neighborhood. Let's say that you are August Bush IV in Huntley, and your home has a helicopter pad on the roof. I don't know how many homes sold in Huntley this past year, but I'm pretty sure that none of them had a helicopter pad on the roof. There is no mansion quite like that guy's mansion. Which means that if I didn't find a different value method, we might accidentally give a break to Augie Bush. And on the list of things I don't want to do as long as I'm alive, giving a tax break to Augie Bush is right up there. So what we would do instead is use something called the cost approach, which basically says, what would happen if the house burned down tomorrow? How much would it cost old Augie to build it back up? If we can figure out how much it would cost Augie to build it back up, we can figure out what the value of the land itself is, and we can depreciate it because the house is 10 years old and it wasn't actually built yesterday. That's called the cost approach. So those are the other approaches to value, and every once in a while, a normal person's house, not Augie Bush's house, we do need to use one of those other approaches to value. Like, for example, if every home in the neighborhood is selling for a particular price, but one house is in a weird situation, for example, because of what we would call traffic influence, because it's at a busy corner or because it's right there on the creek. There's reasons why we would use different influence factors or why we might use the cost approach. And so what I'd like to do is hand this back over to Burchelle and let her talk about this for a little bit and talk about what some typical situations might be where we would use a different approach to value or where we would use one of those factors to make sure that we're treating everybody fairly.
Well, sometimes with the cost approach, for example, farther up in North County, we have some people with acreage where some could have a secondary house on the property. They can have lots of barns and pole barns. They can have silos and grain shelters. They can have a whole bunch of agricultural things on the property as well as living units. So that could be a reason why we may use the cost approach. But on some of the busy streets like Vale, the 2-lane part of Vale, where they can't expand it because you have a cornfield on one side and a lake on the other side, they can have an influence factor on certain parts of Old Halls Ferry, especially by Hammer Farms coming down that windy road. Nobody obeys the speed limit right there. So you can have, yes, guilty. But you can have some influence factor on the traffic right there, or even on the houses that are on Lindbergh. They may face those traffic influences. It's 4 lanes with a turn lane, and the speed limit was 50, but they go faster than that. So those are some other reasons why there could be an influence factor based on the locality of the property. And so most likely, we try to make sure we get all those that are affected. Every now and then you could miss one, and we point that out and we can fix something like that. But the heavy traffic, we had this neighborhood is gone now, but when that Carrollton area was over there by the airport and they changed the flight plans, that was an adjustment that had to be made. So there are situations that would generate us to work on something else for the influence factor on the land or the whole neighborhood. So those are a few reasons.
Thanks. I'm going to take a minute now to put on my role and my hat as a traffic cop and remind everybody that we've got just a little more than 15 minutes. We have a hard stop at 7:30. As Jake mentioned earlier, we are not going to be able to answer everyone's questions on this meeting, but if you sent us a question, we absolutely will get back to you in the next few days. So what I want to do now is just take the last few and then leave a little bit of time for everyone to do a wrap up. The first question, which is a comment that the writer wants responded to, says, my appraisal did not walk around my house. He stood at the end of my driveway and did his assessment that way.
So, Winnell, can you talk a little bit about what the policy is in these COVID times for exactly what's okay and what's not okay, and for what kind of home inspection the appraisers should be doing while they're out there in the field?
Well, it really depends on what the task is. We have several different projects that we go on. Right now, we're on the 15% review, where the appraiser, and we're doing it contactless, okay? The state says if your property goes up 15% or more since the last reassessment, that we have to notify the owner and then try to verify our records for accuracy to make sure we have the correct information. Due to COVID, we're going, as the state says, and notifying you by leaving a postcard at the front door. The inspection part on that postcard is we try to view as much of the property as we possibly can from the front of the house. I mean, we have to get your permission to walk around your property. And if you've ever received a little white card from us, one says pay and one says pay. Property access, yes. Property access, no. If we don't have property access, yes, the only thing we can do is verify what we can see. So if the person that asked that question or made that statement, did he leave a card at her front door? I don't know what project he was doing. Maybe he was standing back on the sidewalk so he could see all of the front. Because if it's a 2-story, we try to see if we have the 2nd story just right. So if we stand back on the sidewalk, we can see the top of your house. There are some projects that don't require us to get out of our car. Taxpayer says that we're doing a drive-by. It's not a drive-by. We may be doing a neighborhood review. We may have had a lot of burnouts in a neighborhood. So we want to go through, see the properties that are burned out, see what condition the rest of the houses are, and how this affects that neighborhood. So it's several different projects that we're out on, which determines whether we go up to your front door, whether we have contact with you, or whether we just need to find out what's going on in that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And the core point there is that if we're doing one of those real visits to your home rather than a neighborhood review or that sort of thing, your proof that a human being was actually there is that little postcard wedged into your door or what have you. And that's also that has the number to call. And to be clear, whether we are required by state law to visit your property or not, we want to know if we're wrong about something on the inside that we can't see or something in the back that we can't see, right? So in the pre-COVID times when I would go ring folks' doorbells when I was doing some of these 15% reviews, I would always ask for permission, even if you didn't want me inside, to take out my measuring tape and measure just a couple sides of the property. You know, just walk up to the fence of the backyard, run the tape across the front. Let's just make sure that if my dimensions say your house is 42 by 50, that I really do get 42 on this side. So those are the kinds of things we do routinely, but we do them at a little more of a distance these days. But the core thing to understand is the thing that matters isn't whatever particular piece of data the appraiser was there to get when they were there on that day. The thing that matters is you should take a look at our actual records of your house, because if we are wrong, we want to know about it.
Can I add to that, Jake?
Please, Burchell.
The appraiser didn't do the assessment when they got to your house. The
Excellent
assessment
point.
is already done and the preliminary values have been created. That's what generated the visit. So they didn't just stand at the end of the driveway and say, oh, I think it's worth this. They had some paperwork that they were reviewing that already had your preliminary value on it. And so we on the visit just to let you know, to inform you what was going on. And
Let me jump in there
around the property.
To let you know and to inform you what's going on, and to make sure that we don't have something obviously wrong. Because if we think your property value is going up 20% compared to 2 years ago, then it's worth it. It's a very good idea to go out and check that it really is the 2-story house that we think it is. Because you're not gonna find out about condition issues on the inside from that external review, but what you will do is you will catch obvious mistakes. And I remember, Burchell, when you trained me in how to do those inspections. We did it in University City. We did it in a neighborhood not far from downtown U City. And I thought for sure that it was going to be a walk in the park. I was like, our records are going to be right. This is fine. We're just going to walk down, scribble, be a couple minutes at each house, and off we go. And it was a learning experience. And I see from the look on your face that you remember it as well as I do, because the reality is there are 360,000 of those pieces of residential real estate, and we are never right about all of them. And it is amazing how many mistakes and inaccuracies and additions and new decks and new porches and all the rest of it you can pick up by just having an actual human being walking down the block. Sarah, do we have time for 1 or 2 more?
We do. We have time for 2 more. And then unfortunately, we're going to have to cut off the question portion. But the second to last question is this. If I just appealed my assessment and it was approved in August of 2020, why did the assessor increase the assessment back to the value that I appealed? I didn't have any work done, mostly due to COVID.
Great question. And this is one of those things that can be extremely frustrating for the homeowner, for the taxpayer, right? You go through the process, you do everything right, and the Board of Equalization agrees with you. And in 2019, they lowered the value of the property by $20,000 to reflect what they thought it really could sell for. And now here it is, you get your change of assessment notice in the mail and whoop, it's right back up, right? So there's the person looks at that and your first instinct is, oh my God, I just got punished for fighting City Hall, right? Those jerks just raised it right back up again. Before you point your finger at me and Winnell and Burchell and say we're all a bunch of jerks, stop and take a look, because there's any number of reasons that could happen. One reason it could have happened is simply because homes have been selling like hot potatoes in your neighborhood. And while that value might have been accurate 2 years ago, now we have a whole bunch of valid sales up and down the block. And we know, you know what? The values really are going up. Another possibility for something like that happening could be updated data for any number of other reasons. And it could have to do with additions or new construction on the home. And a third possibility could be a good old-fashioned mistake, right? It could be that somebody after the board made that reduction in value, even though nothing changed, somebody failed to code it properly into the system. And so even though you got your change 2 years ago, you know, we are the government. And if you think the government is perfect all the time, then you've never met any piece of American government that I have met. And so, again, I think the best advice here, that question is general enough that I'm kind of glad it got asked, but every individual circumstance is unique. And so before you get loaded for bear and before you say, oh my God, I'm going to have to appeal and file file an appeal against these jerks every 2 years for the rest of my life, right? First, take a look at our comparable sales and make sure that we aren't actually right. Make sure that what's going on isn't just that a bunch of homes have sold in your neighborhood recently. And if it still looks wrong and it still looks wonky, then give us a call. We'll have an appraiser take a look at it and see if somebody messed something up.
Okay, and the last question I have really is a question, I think, for Jake, for you, and perhaps also for one of the councilwomen who are here. I'm going to paraphrase it because it's a little bit long, but the person writes in and says that there's an ongoing littering problem in their area that the St. Louis County Public Works Department is responsible for and doesn't take care of, and will that influence the value of their property?
So I could hazard a guess as to what neighborhood the questioner lives in, and I see LaRonda Wilson on the call here this evening, and she will remember during political season last year traveling with me to some parts of North St. Louis County that have been used as people's personal dump sites, and it is a horrible thing to see. And it breaks your heart because it is a problem for this community that is embarrassing. And in a just and civilized and modern society, we ought to commit ourselves to fixing it. But since, alas, I am not the county executive, I am only your county assessor. I think you're right that a part of that question is for the council members. And I know that they have done more than their share and will continue to do more than their share to put pressure on the administration to devote real resources to fixing those problems. In the meantime, back to us, back to the job of valuing your property. That is absolutely a legitimate factor for us to consider. You heard Burchell talking before about the kinds of condition issues and traffic factors and so forth that might cause us to either use those influence factors or in some circumstances change the value approach that we're using entirely. That is precisely the kind of circumstance where someone's going to want to have a direct interchange with one of our appraisers, show us pictures, show us what's going on in the neighborhood, show us what it's doing to property values, so that if there's a way that we can help, we can in fact help.
Okay, well, thank you. That's the last question that we have time for. One more time, I want to give everyone who is listening or watching the phone number to call. It's 314-615-4981. Or you can email us at assessor@stlouisco.com. You can also reach out to the councilwomen. I know everyone will be happy to try to answer questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to, I'm not sure whether Councilwoman Days or Councilwoman Webb to do the wrap up.
Well, I'm going to say age before beauty, and I'm going to go first, Councilwoman Webb. Okay. Well, listen, I thank you so much, Assessor Zimmerman and your staff. You have been absolutely eloquent in your responses to the questions that we have had. In the chat, you will also see the contact information for us, for Councilwoman Webb's office and mine. And so we look forward to, if you have challenges at all, please give us a call about that. I do remember, and I'll just say very briefly, when we went from an appointed to an elected assessor, that was a major concern. Mr. Zimmerman talked about that, and the rural people kept lowering their assessments, and because they had to be voted on each year, and they did not want to upset the electorate by, when they would up their assessments. And so we fought that for a long time, but you have to have a person in here who really is interested and committed to doing the right thing for the right people. And I think that that's the person we have now. The last thing I want to say is that a lot of people, particularly seniors, may not have email access. They may not be able to get to the website. Thank you so much for continuing to put that phone number up, 615-4981. If you have any questions at all, give them a call. Thank you so much, and you all have a good evening and stay safe. Councilwoman Webb.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ritter, and I don't know if I agree with that. I'm going to say wisdom. I want to make sure that everyone know first that we're so grateful for you all joining us today. Assessor Jake Zimmerman, thank you and your staff for making this plain and simple. It was so informative, and I've learned so much in this hour and a half you share with us. But you know me, as the engineer, I still have questions, so I'm going to call you offline. I do want to make sure, as Councilwoman Ritter Day says, that there's a way to get information to our constituents that don't have internet access and are not tied into the internet. So if you have any literature, if there are any flyers, door knockers, anything that we can help disseminate, please let our office know, because we will do that. I want to make sure that the lack of internet connection does not mean a lack of engagement and a lack of information. And so please, by any means necessary, get us that information and we will get that out to our community. Again, this has been very informative. Thank you and your staff again. It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you all those who care in North County that was able to make it, for being here tonight and making sure that you got the information. Let's be neighbors helping neighbors, each one teach one. So now that you are informed and educated, you go to your neighbor to your left and your neighbor to the right and make sure that they're informed and engaged as well. Again, thank you all so much. I want to thank the legislative assistants for being available, Shantae, for making sure that all of the information was in the chat box. I greatly appreciate that. And with no other questions, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mr. Zimmerman, to see if you have any closing remarks.
I really want to give a shout out to both of you, Councilwoman Webb and Councilwoman Days. I don't think Maria Chappelle-Nadal is with us at the moment, but in addition to her, a very special, enthusiastic shout out to Shantae Harmon-Young for going the extra mile to publicize this and make sure that folks in the community know about it. A town hall meeting is only as good as the people who show up, and I can tell you that this has been the best attended by far of the 3 such town halls that I have done already. And that is a thing that I and my staff are deeply grateful for, because this opportunity to help folks understand what it is that we do so that we can, help you to help us in doing the work better. It only works when we get the word out. And I just want to thank both the two of you and your team so much for this level of commitment to the community so that we can all be more helpful to the people we serve. I know that we didn't get a chance to get to everybody's question tonight. I am sure that Sarah had to brush over some of the ones that were about individual property questions rather than questions of general interest. So we'll look forward to getting back with everyone, and to folks who may be listening to this in recorded fashion later or who weren't able to get on tonight. I want you to know that we're here for you. Reach out if you need us, because that's what you pay us to do. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good
And
night.
with that, I'm going to say good evening, everyone. Have a good evening.